Have you ever wondered why the English word spirit, a word that universally means a soul or a ghost or like the animating essence of a living being, is the exact same word we use for hard liquors, like whiskey or rum or vodka?
Yeah, it really is a remarkable linguistic collision when you think about it. I mean, we take this word that represents the most intangible, ethereal aspect of existence, and we literally use it to order a drink at a bar.
Yeah.
It's wild. But the etymology actually points to a time when people viewed the physical and the metaphysical as deeply intertwined, if not completely identical.
And when you look across different cultures and traditions, this paradox really deepens into some massive contradictions about how humanity, interacts with intoxicants.
Mm.
Take Eastern philosophy, for example,
Hmm.
specifically the Buddhist precepts.
Right, the fifth precept.
Exactly. It strictly forbids even a single drop of alcohol, which is a fascinating stance because the most common defense you hear today from almost anyone is the argument of dosage.
Oh, absolutely. The whole just a little bit is fine argument.
Yeah, people argue that having just one drink is perfectly fine, that they're completely functional.
Well, the modern framework is entirely built around tolerance,
Yeah.
and functionality. We measure intoxication by blood alcohol content or like motor skill impairment.
Exactly. But contrast that strict prohibition with ancient rituals involving spirit mediums. In these traditions, you have mediums consuming entire bottles of pure, high-proof liquor during their ceremonies.
Yeah, just chugging it.
Right. And they claim that a deity has descended and actually requires the alcohol to inhabit them. But if you read the foundational texts of those exact same traditions, they explicitly state that heavenly deities do not consume alcohol under any circumstances.
Never. The contradictions are just glaring.
They really are. And decoding them is our mission for today's deep dive. We are going to break down the hidden nature of intoxicants by synthesizing linguistics, the neurobiology of the human brain, and ancient mythology.
Yeah, we're going everywhere from the laboratories of medieval Western alchemists to literal epic wars in heaven.
It's going to be a journey. And by the end of this analysis of the sources, you will likely view a simple glass of alcohol through an entirely different lens.
No doubt about it.
So, to understand how alcohol alters the concept of the spirit on this macro mythological level, we really have to start with how it alters the mind on a microscopic level.
Right, getting down to the biology.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this, because there is a massive piece of pushback that immediately comes to mind with the Buddhist zero-tolerance policy. Buddhism is globally synonymous with the concept of the middle path.
Right.
It's a philosophy built entirely on moderation, on avoiding extremes. So by that logic, a hard prohibition feels, completely contradictory.
Yeah, I get that. Well, what's fascinating here is that this perceived contradiction stems from a pervasive, centuries-old translation conflation. People are confusing two different Pali root words.
How interesting. Like what?
So when people reference the middle path, the Pali word is majjhima. That denotes the middle way, balance, moderation.
Okay, so majjhima is the avoidance of extremes.
Exactly. But the word used in the fifth precept, however, is majja.
Majja.
Yeah. And while it shares a phonetic resemblance, majja actually translates to intoxication, madness, or carelessness.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
It is. The precept was never an instruction to drink in moderation. The explicit instruction is to abstain from intoxicants because they are the foundation of carelessness. You cannot moderate madness, right? The goal is to avoid the state of carelessness entirely.
Okay, that makes sense linguistically. But linguistics aside, let's look at the biological reality for a second. If I have, say, half a glass of Cabernet with dinner, I'm not acting mad or careless.
Sure. Yeah.
My speech isn't slurred, I can hold a complex conversation with you, and my decision-making feels entirely intact. So isn't the strict zero-tolerance policy still kind of an overreaction to a substance that, in small doses, doesn't seem to cause any visible impairment?
I mean, it seems that way, but the absence of visible gross motor impairment is actually where the illusion lies.
Illusion. What do you mean?
Right. Well, to understand the zero-tolerance policy, we have to examine the concept of micro-mindfulness. Advanced mental training in these traditions isn't about walking in a straight line for a sobriety test.
Right.
It is about cultivating a hyper-awareness of your own subtle mental states. And modern neuroscience perfectly aligns with this ancient standard. We know that alcohol, even in microscopic amounts, immediately begins to depress the frontal lobe.
Let's focus on that mechanism for a second.
Yeah.
The frontal lobe acts essentially like the brakes on a car.
That is the perfect analogy, yeah.
It doesn't necessarily drive your thoughts, but it is the critical system that decides which impulses get to move forward into action and which ones, need to be stopped or filtered.
Exactly. The frontal lobe governs executive function, self-regulation, deep self-awareness. When you introduce even a minimal amount of alcohol, you are beginning to grease those brake pads.
That's a scary thought.
It is, because the frontal lobe does not operate on a simple on and off switch. It operates on a dial. And a single drop starts turning that dial down. In the Pali texts, this subtle blunting is called thinamita, which describes a very specific sluggishness or lethargy of the mind. Your gross motor skills are completely untouched, but the pristine, sharp edge of micro-mindfulness is chemically dulled.
So the danger isn't that half a glass of wine makes you crash your car. The danger is that it creates a maya, an illusion.
Exactly.
The alcohol chemically alters the brain just enough to make you think, hey, I'm completely fine. I'm operating at 100% capacity.
Right, you feel totally normal.
But that very thought, the subjective belief that you are in total control, occurs precisely because the hardware responsible for evaluating your control has been compromised. The illusion of sobriety is the actual trap.
You nailed it. The moment the brain registers the thought that it is perfectly fine after a drink, the substance has already successfully altered the brain's perception of its own capability.
That's incredible.
It's that subjective blind spot that is the genesis of carelessness. Because think about it, you cannot accurately measure your own cognitive deficit using the exact cognitive tools that are currently being suppressed.
Man, that is so true. So if a single drop creates a microscopic illusion of control, how did early societies interpret the massive, visible loss of control that comes from, heavy consumption?
Oh, that's where things get really wild.
Right. To answer that, we have to trace the English word spirit back to its origins in the medieval laboratories of Western alchemists.
Yeah. When alchemists applied their methods to fermented wine and grain mashes, they were observing a process of distillation that, to them, mirrored the fundamental separation of the universe.
Right. They're in these dark labs with bubbling flasks.
Exactly. They would apply heat to the fermented liquid, forcing it to boil and vaporize.
So they were essentially watching a murky physical liquid transform into an invisible gas and then condense back into a perfectly clear, incredibly potent fluid.
Yeah, and to the alchemical worldview, matter was divided into the gross, physical body and the subtle, animating essence.
The soul.
Right. So by boiling away the heavy water and the decaying organic material of the grape or the grain, they believed they were literally extracting the pure essence of the plant. They were separating the plant's soul from its corpse.
Which completely explains the nomenclature. The Latin root spiritus translates to breath.
Yes.
Because when you have a highly distilled pure alcohol and you expose it to the air, it evaporates almost instantly. It vanishes from the physical realm.
It's just gone.
So to an alchemist, watching this clear liquid disappear into thin air looked exactly like an invisible breath, or a ghost, literally leaving a body.
Yeah, the physical properties of the liquid reinforced this entire metaphysical interpretation. It was clear it evaporated like breath, and it possessed this intense, flammable energy.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The most profound validation of this theory came from observing the physiological and psychological effects when a human being actually consumed it.
Oh, absolutely. Just think about the mechanics of taking a heavy dose of distilled liquor.
Right. There is an immediate physiological shock.
Yeah, your blood vessels dilate, causing a sudden flush of intense heat across the skin. The heart rate spikes.
And then, following that rapid depression of the frontal lobe we just discussed, there is a severe behavioral shift. The quiet, reserved individual suddenly becomes aggressively loud. The cautious person becomes recklessly impulsive.
Right. And today, we understand that as severe prefrontal cortex inhibition combined with a flood of dopamine and altered GABA receptor activity.
The brain's inhibitory pathways are basically just shutting down.
Yeah, the brakes are out.
But ancient observers didn't have functional MRI machines to see GABA receptors firing. They watched a person consume the invisible breath of a plant, experience a surge of unnatural heat, and suddenly adopt an entirely different persona.
They literally become a different person.
Exactly. The alchemical interpretation wasn't that the person's brain chemistry had been tweaked. The interpretation was that an external entity had been introduced into the human vessel. It was literal possession.
Because the logic of the era dictates that two souls cannot occupy the same space and maintain order.
Right.
So when you consume the concentrated spirit of the plant, That entity enters your body and actively displaces your own consciousness.
It pushes you out.
Yeah. Your own spirit is pushed out of the driver's seat and the foreign spirit takes the wheel. You act out of character because, functionally, you are no longer the one acting.
That blows my mind. Because if Western alchemists observed the physical liquid and concluded it acted as an accidental possessing spirit, Eastern rituals took that exact premise and weaponized it.
Oh, they took it to a whole other level.
They didn't just observe the possession, they actively invited it in through the practice of spirit mediums. Speaking of being possessed by another spirit, let's look at those actual spirit mediums.
This is where the intersection of neurobiology and ancient ritual becomes incredibly revealing. In various Eastern traditions, mediums serve as conduits.
Right.
They invite a spiritual entity into their physical body to communicate with the community, offer blessings, sometimes perform exorcisms.
And a central mechanism of these rituals involves the medium consuming vast quantities of alcohol. I mean, sometimes they're chugging entire bottles of liquor in a matter of minutes.
Yeah, it's intense. And based on the neurobiology of the frontal lobe, the utility of the alcohol here is just brutally efficient.
How so?
Well, it is an engineered shutdown of the self. The micro-mindfulness we discussed earlier requires a highly active, sharply tuned prefrontal cortex.
Right.
The medium requires the exact opposite. By intentionally consuming massive amounts of alcohol, they are chemically forcing the executive center of the brain to go offline.
Wow. They're suppressing their ego, their conscious self-monitoring, their behavioral inhibitions.
Everything. This rapid cognitive depression makes it remarkably easy to slip into a deep dissociative trance state.
So the alcohol is literally the chemical key to unlocking the door of the vessel.
Exactly.
But wait, this brings us back to the massive contradiction in the source texts.
Mm.
The medium state, they're consuming the liquor because a heavenly deity has descended into them and is demanding the drink.
Right.
Yet when we consult the foundational texts regarding the cosmological rules of these deities, the texts are unambiguous. The high gods do not consume intoxicants.
Never. To understand why the gods abstain and to identify what is actually possessing the medium, we have to look at the cosmological myth of Tavatimsa heaven.
Okay, tell me about Tavatimsa.
It's a foundational story that explicitly addresses the origin of this prohibition among the divine.
So Tavatimsa is described as a celestial realm, right? Like an absolute paradise.
Yes, but the mythology states it wasn't originally inhabited by the high deities. It was actually the ancestral domain of a race of beings known as the Asuras.
The Asuras.
Yeah. The Asuras are very complex figures in Vedic and Buddhist cosmology. They're typically characterized as powerful, fiercely proud, and prone to very volatile passions.
Okay, so they're hot-headed titans, basically.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And Havatimsa was their realm until a deity named Maga, who would later ascend to the title of Indra, the king of the gods, was reborn into this celestial plane.
So Indra looks at Tavatimsa heaven, decides it's prime real estate, and wants it for his own retinue.
Naturally.
But a direct military assault against the Asuras was too risky, right? Because they were immensely powerful.
Right. A frontal attack would have been a disaster. So Indra engineered a coup through hospitality.
Through a party.
Exactly. He hosted a grand, opulent, celestial feast and invited the entire Asura population. And the centerpiece of this feast was the provision of limitless, divinely potent, intoxicating liquor.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Indra and his followers completely abstained, but they encouraged the Asuras to indulge heavily.
So the Asuras drank until the chemical displacement of their own awareness was complete. They became entirely incapacitated, literally blacking out from the intoxication.
Yeah. And once the Asuras were rendered completely defenseless by the alcohol, Indra's forces simply picked them up and physically cast them out of Tavatimsa.
They literally tossed them out of heaven.
Just threw them down the slopes of the cosmic mountain, Mount Meru.
That is brutal. So the Asuras wake up at the bottom of the cosmic mountain, their heads pounding, only to realize that their loss of paradise wasn't due to being overpowered in battle.
No, not at all.
They lost heaven entirely because they surrendered their awareness to an intoxicant.
Exactly. And the realization of how they were defeated prompted this monumental vow. The Asuras swore they would never again allow their minds to be clouded, vowing to abstain from all intoxicating liquor for eternity.
Wait, really? For eternity?
Yes. In fact, the etymology of their name is directly tied to this exact event.
Oh, this is fascinating.
In ancient languages, the prefix "a" means not or without, and "sura" refers to strong liquor. Thus, asura literally translates to the
Oh,
non-drinkers.
wow. So they are eternally defined by their vow of absolute sobriety. Okay, so what does this all mean? The Asuras refuse to drink, and Indra and the conquering gods weaponize alcohol precisely because they knew it destroyed awareness. What then do the high deities actually consume in these celestial realms?
Well, the texts describe the high deities consuming a substance called amrita.
Right, the nectar of immortality.
Yeah, often translated that way. But the defining characteristic of amrita is its biochemical and spiritual mechanism. It does not intoxicate, it does not suppress the frontal lobe or induce thenamida, that lethargy of mind we talked about. Amrita does the exact opposite.
It wakes you up.
Yes. It triggers a profound, luminous expansion of mindfulness. It sharpens the intellect and elevates the conscious state rather than degrading it.
Which leaves us with a stark process of elimination.
Yeah, it does.
If the highest divine beings only consume the nectar of hyper-awareness and the displaced titans are strictly sober, who on earth is the entity demanding the bottle of whiskey when the spirit medium enters their trance?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the theological texts provide a very specific diagnosis.
Okay,
I mean, sure, modern psychology would argue the medium is experiencing a dissociative placebo effect, acting out cultural expectations.
sure, obviously.
But operating within the spiritual framework of the sources, the entities being channeled are definitively not high-level deities, because high-level deities have evolved past the crude physical desires that require a compromised nervous system to enjoy.
Right, they don't need the chemical illusion.
Exactly. The entities demanding the alcohol are classified as lower-level spirits, yakshas, kumhandas, or hungry ghosts.
Hungry ghost, yeah.
These are beings bound to the lower terrestrial planes. They are trapped by their intense, desperate attachments to physical sensations, the visceral cravings, and the chaotic passions of human existence.
So they crave the physiological burn of the ethanol and the temporary chaotic madness it induces in the human nervous system.
Right, they want that feeling.
So when a medium suppresses their frontal lobe and throws open the doors to their consciousness, they aren't acting as a vessel for divine light.
Not at all.
They're literally serving as a biological tavern for an earthbound ghost desperate to experience the chemical displacement of intoxication one more time.
It's dark, but yeah. The ritual isn't an elevation of the spirit. It is a regression into the very attachments that the foundational philosophies are actively trying to sever.
Pulling all these diverse sources together just reveals a remarkable consensus. It
Yeah.
really does.
It's undeniable.
Whether we are analyzing the strict discipline of the Buddhist precepts, the metallurgical observations of medieval alchemists, or the cosmological epics of ancient India, every single framework isolates the exact same core mechanism regarding alcohol.
Yeah. In the Eastern traditions, it is the maja, the chemical agent, that introduces lethargy to the mind, systematically dismantling the micro-mindfulness required to accurately perceive reality and achieve liberation.
And in Western alchemy, it is the spiritus, the highly volatile extracting breath that literally displaces your own consciousness, forcing your true self into the passenger seat, while a foreign, chaotic energy takes control of the physical vessel.
And in the mythological epics, it is the ultimate tool of dispossession. It's the mechanism that blinds the powerful and causes them to forfeit their place in paradise.
Right.
And these aren't just poetic metaphors, They are ancient attempts to describe a biological reality that modern science has now codified.
Oh, definitely.
I mean, the World Health Organization recently issued an explicit, data-driven mandate regarding alcohol, stating unequivocally that there is absolutely zero safe level of consumption for the human body.
Zero. The scientific consensus essentially strips away the mythology and the alchemy, leaving us with the raw biological mechanism.
Exactly.
There is no dosage that does not inflict cellular and cognitive damage. The ultimate takeaway from our sources today is that alcohol is fundamentally a solvent of awareness. It is a mechanism designed to alter our mental state and erode our grip on our original unclouded selves.
Yeah, and I think it is vital to acknowledge that navigating the modern social landscape often involves the personal choice to consume alcohol for relaxation or celebration.
Of course.
However, the synthesis of these texts really challenges us to evaluate our ultimate objectives. If the goal is the cultivation of a sharp, unflinching awareness, true mental development, and engaging with reality without the crutch of a chemical filter, then actively avoiding the substance that induces that illusion is the most logical, noble path forward.
The sources reframe the entire concept of prohibition. It isn't a puritanical restriction of joy.
No, not at all.
It is a tactical defense of your own cognitive sovereignty. It is about retaining control over the dial of your own awareness.
I love how you phrase that, retaining control over the dial.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to consider long after this deep dive ends. We often hear people say they need a drink just to loosen up and be themselves at a party, right?
Oh, all the time.
But if centuries of mythology, alchemical philosophy, and modern neurology all agree that alcohol functions by suppressing our highest faculties and disconnecting us from our true selves, it begs a much larger, more troubling question about the structures of modern society. Why is our culture's default mechanism for networking, celebrating, and forging connections with other human beings built entirely around the consumption of a substance fundamentally designed to make us disconnect from ourselves?